from Hamburg to another English episode in English. As always, I'm the host of the podcast, Arne Otte, and this time got Nick Gloff on the other side of the globe for a podcast here, which I'm very happy to have him on the podcast. And as always, when I do the English ones, bear with my English. Yeah, I try my very best to make everything work, and you can understand what I mean, what I say, and what I try to say. So if you don't know Nick, Nick is a absolutely passionate bodybuilder, educator, coach, got a BS in exercise science and kinesiology. I think so.
It was a pretty good try.
Yeah, I tried my best.
Yeah.
So yeah, Nick is someone who I think about or see stuff he brings out there. He can dive into micro parts of our sport and keep the macro perspective totally in check, which is something that most of us are, I think, not very good at when it comes to bodybuilding, when it comes to our sport, when it comes to being emotional with our sport and our progress. And so, yeah, I'm looking absolutely forward to the discussion we will have. Nick, how's it going? How was your first meal of the day? How many meals do you got in already?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And you did great with that. You're English speaking for the attempt of what my degrees are in. Yeah, exercise science and kinesiology is the way that you pronounce it. Right, yeah, perfect. Yeah, it's a lot easier than it looks. Yep. Yeah, but sure. I'm doing pretty good. Before we started recording, I talked to you a little bit. I'm just a tad bit sick. So as you might be trying to decode what Arne is saying here with his translations here, you might have to translate me a little bit because I may be a little scratchy or a little nasally at times, but we're doing okay. We're doing okay. So training is going pretty all right now. It's hit or miss depending on whether or not I'm sick at the time, which is the miss I'm currently in. But aside from that, things have been going pretty well. Prep is starting for me for my season coming up in November is the show plans as of right now. Last couple months have been pretty good for my visibility and what I'm trying to do within the industry with seminars, getting more education out there. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with the way things are. And to your first question of the day, how many meals do I have in?
Yeah.
I have three. I have three already right now. Yeah, it's 1:17 p.m. right now for where I'm at in the world, down here in sunny Florida. And I have 3 meals in at this point of the day and 3 coffees in. So
you should be pretty good energy wise. Yeah, even if you're a little bit under the weather. So that's pretty good. So Nick, I said you are pretty good with the micro and macro perspective when it comes to our sports. And I will try to zoom a little bit out when it comes to your person and to the bodybuilder you are, the coach that you are. The first question would be, what was your motive when you started bodybuilding, and changed this motive, and when changed it, and how does it changed when you started? Pretty philosophy question to start.
Yeah. So that's a really long question if I want to make it a really long question. But when I first started, I started almost out of necessity. Mm-hmm. So when I was really young, I can give it Cliff Notes version, but when I was about 10, I ended up, because I was a really active kid, super active kid. I always did everything outside, and I was that guy. But then I got really sick with appendicitis at one point. And that happened to me while I was out playing outside when it's first hit me. And so when that had happened, well, I got brought into the hospital later that night and it burst. And I was in critical care for a good long time because the damage was pretty significant. And so me and my little child brain, I associated that pain and that event with physical activity because that's what I was doing at the time that it happened. And so I had a couple of years there that I just turned into a complete potato and did nothing at all and went the total opposite direction. And within those 1.5 to 2 year gap that was the way that I was, I realized that there was no way that I could ever be happy living my life that way. And there was something that I had to change. And so in that, I had decided that I was going to start taking care of myself, because I wasn't going to be in any good way, shape, or form throughout my adult life if I didn't fix that early. And so I started training, and I started training for the football team, the American football team, just to make sure, because we have overseas audience primarily here. So American football I was trying to get into, and there was a weight limit for me to get in and play at all. And I was about 30-ish pounds above the weight limit at that time. And so that's, I mean, roughly 15 kilos up. So a little bit under 15 kilos up. So I had to lose that in about like 2 months was what had to be done for me to even have a shot to play. And so out of that necessity, and I already had made the decision that that was what I was going to do. I was going to no longer be the person that was just the kid that was the pushover, the one that self-isolated, stayed away from everybody, didn't achieve the goals that I wanted, didn't stick to the things that I told myself, didn't represent my family the way I wanted to, didn't represent my own name the way I wanted to. I was going to change that. And so I wasn't going to go back on what I decided I was going to do, and I wasn't going to take failure as an option. And so I made it happen, but I made that happen through extreme means of pretty much working out in some capacity for most of my waking hours for the entire time leading up to that point. And in that, I found that there was almost like finding a bliss within the work is what I found from doing that. It's the same thing that people going through their preps feel, or people on a marathon run or something like that feel. So all of this pain and suffering and all of this that you just have to go through and go through and go through, and none of it's gratifying at all up until you just hit the point that you're just, I'm here. And you have this drive state that just forms behind you, that you're in flow, and this is where I am. This is what I'm existing to do in this moment. This is it. And so I found that purpose within doing that and having to apply myself as hard as I did. And with that, I never found another thing that I could apply myself quite as fully to than that training. The sports did their thing for me, and I enjoyed playing the sports. And then in some ways, the other sports that I played have their own specific aspects to them that gave me a different type of that drive state and that feeling of purpose. But there was nothing that grasped me like the training itself did. And so I knew very, very early then, it was 12, 13 years old, that training was me. It was what really gave me that extra drive behind everything else that I would ever do. And so with that knowledge, I ended up going and studying the only thing that I cared about that deeply, which was training, hence the degrees. And then before I had even left high school and got into college, I had already known that bodybuilding was going to be the way that I applied myself through that training, because it connected with me, with the dedication, the unending need to work, always having to go through it, long periods of having to push off gratification and go through the suffering to get to where no one else will go. That was what really connected with me, more so than just lifting the biggest weights or doing like anything quite like that. It's cool. And a part of that aspect still lives within what I do, but nothing quite like bodybuilding, knowing what it takes to do it and just doing it. And so that's kind of the philosophy behind what got me there.
That's a pretty awesome that you find that so early in your life, that it came so early to you, and so directly and so fully that you can just go that way, and you're absolutely sure that it's your way. That's I think that's something like a present in some regards, I would say, because when that's the initial question I ask every client of mine at first: what's your motive? What's your why? Did you have thought about that when you are doing the sport? And I always always been surprised how often people not really did that till the day today. They trained 5 years, some people 10 years under their belt, and they never thought about that, or not that they know that they thought about that. So that's pretty awesome to hear how that came for you. And I think nothing changed since then, I guess.
Not much.
Not much.
Not much. No. Not by a lot. But what I did experience going through all the things that I have over the last couple of years, good times and bad times, I have found that it is something that is always here. Mm-hmm. And so going, and I will say definitely that you're right, that it is a present, it is a gift, that it came to me and I knew that that was the direction I wanted to go. However, me figuring out exactly what I was going to do with that was quite a rocky path. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of places that I thought I was going to be. I thought maybe I was going to do medical. Thought I was going to go and try and be a doctor. You know, I thought I was going to do some subsection in there. I wanted to be like an orthopedist at one point. I wanted to go into endocrinology at one point. Mm-hmm. Definitely didn't go through that. I thought about doing research, and I actually did do research for a little bit in college as well, where I worked in a biomechanics lab for a few years, but I never went to be further in education up to this point, at least, to be a full researcher and to go and establish my name within public record for it. So those are a lot of paths too, that I had the options out in front of me, and cardiac rehab was something that I was interested in when I was in college as well, to a lesser degree. And so I don't want there to be like the perception that at like so young, I figured it out. Yeah. I'm like, I'm going to do bodybuilding and I'm going to be a bodybuilding coach. And here we go. And here starts the path. It's like, no. There was
you got a good direction. Yeah. But then they have to find a lot of ways to find where you're today, and probably are on your way to. Yeah. We never know where we end in 10 years, 20 years.
Exactly.
So I think you're pretty young, I think. How old are you?
No, 24.
24. That's pretty young. I'm 39 now, which, so I can absolutely what I can say. When I started all of the stuff, like when I was 25, I think, I started to going into being a personal trainer, then getting online coaching in and stuff. That's like 14 years now, and I am where I am today. I always saw myself here, but in completely other and in another environment and completely other ways. It came together, but in completely other pieces and time frames and stuff. So it's always great to see. That's what I like most of the time of the sport, is to see the career of athletes and coaches from like in 10-year spans and stuff. When you see someone and he's still here in the industry, in the bodybuilding industry, in the coaching industry, that's a not lot time in our sport, but a lot of time in the industry, I would say. So I hope we see you in 10 years still here, and we'll do a podcast in 10 years, and I can laugh.
I hope so too. So I will say you're doing fantastic for being 39. I would never have pegged you for being 39. No,
that's awesome, because a lot of people give me that, but so what did you say then? That's when I was at like these we got these fears here, what's it called, like the FIBO. It's like a with like a, I don't know the word in English. And when I was there the first time, like 10 years ago, this was the whole, like 10 years, I don't know, the whole gym shark and this movement. And I saw athletes there and stuff, and I talked to them, and then people asked them stuff and the same stuff. And they always say it was like, oh, you're looking so young and so fresh and so vital. And then it's a lot of sleep and a lot of water and a lot of hard work. And so it's like, all right, that's not it. It's a lot of hard work, but it's genetics, I think. So, because when I wasn't bodybuilding and doing fitness, I had a time like a time span of 5 years. I was partying and drunk for like four out of 7 days a week, and so doesn't look like that, but yeah.
No.
I find my way out of that into a better way to get my life on. So
yeah, you did a great job. I wouldn't peg you for like, if I were to try to age range you, I'd probably go between like 28 to 32.
Awesome. That's
like 32 would be like, I'd be really stretching to try and peg you at 32. Be like, 29-ish, almost 30, probably where I would go.
That's lovely to hear. Since becoming a dad, I felt like I was aging. Like the last 1.5 years, I was like it was like 10 years. It's like from the stress and adaptations you have to make to your life and stuff. All awesome adaptations, but yeah. So
you must have looked just about 18 last year then.
Yeah, probably should look before that, before I got the baby girl.
Wow.
So when we jump into bodybuilding and into the nitty gritty and micro stuff, what I like to start is, what's your perspective when it comes to training? I wrote the word down, fundamentalism. That's something that comes to my mind when I think about your content all the time, doing fundamental stuff and work with that. So can you give a little bit insight when it comes to like training? What's your perspective on training? What's the bullet points when it comes to that out of your perspective?
Moin Moin, ich bin's Arne. Kurze Unterbrechung, um dich auf unseren Coaching-Service hinzuweisen. Wenn du schon des Längeren damit kämpfst, deinen Hypertrophie-Fortschritt konstant positiv auszurichten und du eine sehr persönliche und motivorientierte Zusammenarbeit mit einem Coach schätzen würdest, dann check den Link in der Beschreibung und melde dich.
For me to encapsulate the basics in the easiest way that I can, the fundamentals, and what I believe are going to be the things that bring people at whatever age range they are, whatever experience level they are, from where they are to the next step. What are the things that we know actually generate results? That is how you boil it down. Because like you introduced me with, I am kind of the guy at this point that I talk really, really detailed on very small aspects of things a lot of the time. But I always couch it directly within a bigger macro picture of, okay, here's this thing. Here's why it matters. Here's why it probably doesn't matter that much. And this is what you do about it, so it's actually practical. Is pretty much how my structure of most things go. And that's kind of the way that I look at almost every single piece of what we do within training for bodybuilding. It's like we have all of these people, myself included, you included, everyone else that does this. We spend all of our time digging in on this stuff. And every detail further that we can dig away and pull away to see, maybe there's another step and another step and another step to get more and more granular within the details that we know how to manipulate. We kind of get lost in them a little bit too much. And we forget that before we then try to excavate out 12 layers deep to figure out all of the answers to this question, we forget that the first layer was adequate. And usually it is. And then maybe as you move on further through time in your development, the second layer or the third layer, maybe the fourth layer, and that doesn't apply to everything. Maybe some things you're going to need to go a further depth to have better results. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes they're non-linear paths to the same place. And you try to figure out which one's going to be the superior path. And there's usually an argument between what's superior and what's inferior, but usually it's a wash when we look at it over broad periods of time. Or things that we already knew that were smart ideas way back when that we can refute with smart words and data ends up being reproven true with smarter words and newer data as years go on. So the biggest things that I look at getting to the actual details for this question: load management and progressive overload over time. Not meaning progressive overload within sessions, progressive overload over broad periods of time, years. And now progressive overload, here's the next levels or the next trees upon that branch. You have accuracy within that. You have control over tempo. You have exaggeration of end ranges, loading within those end ranges, progressing within those three already. Progression in absolute load. Progression of relative load based off of what your body weight is at that current time. You have volume progressions within all of the constraints of the last few, as all of those have increased to allow that to happen and the volume to be still effective. All of those are progressive measures that change over time. And then there's other subcategories of things that you can still manipulate to get yourself further on. But that is the basic, what gets results. Progressive overload over long periods of time within the places that it makes sense. So where it doesn't make sense is having an endless look at any one of those variables and thinking any one of them is the answer. Going way too far down load is king route ends up getting you hurt. It ends up pushing you away further and further from control and accuracy and making any sort of accurate progressions within end ranges for muscle tissues. That takes you away from the goal. Too high a volume moves you too far away from load. Too high a volume typically moves you too far away from accuracy within the movement. Too high a volume makes things too hard to recover from. Being too accurate with movement ends up completely taking the teeth out of your intensity. You have lesser ability to do effective volume. You have lesser ability to do the loading that you actually have capacity to do, which is the cause of the volume not being effective. And so within all of these things, that's the big grand thing. If you're watching the visual, if I have a bedrock here and it's just what gets results, the stump of the tree, progressive overload, tree branches, all of this extra stuff. Mm-hmm. And then all of those tree branches have intersecting branches that go across each other because they're all connected in some way, shape, or form. And if you cut off one, it's going to affect another one. If you try to get one to just get all the focus all the time, the other ones are going to die. That's how it works. So what gets you results is how you grow that tree the highest and widest. You got to start trying to get at progressive overload at the base first.
That's an awesome visualization. Once again, say it in English. You know what I mean? Visualization.
Visualization.
Yeah? Visualization. All right, there yes. I got it.
Yes.
So I got the tree now in front of my eyes probably. So the listeners, I think that's when it comes to all of that stuff, those analogies and stuff, they're so helpful for people to get that what you just talked about. When it comes to all the aspects you were talking about, one thing that comes to my mind is it's something like getting skilled in these aspects and being competent within these first aspects you mentioned about. So that's another word that comes to my mind when it comes to bodybuilding and all of this stuff. How would you say competence in the word that it means? How can we get competent in those aspects?
The best way to learn and become competent in any of the things that you're going to do within the gym space is to start with the most basic thing that you can and start to learn how to use your body the way that your body was intended to be used. That is the way that you access competence across all of the movements that you're going to need for the sport. If you have no ability to coordinate movements at a high level, you need to scale it back and start where you can, but always be on the route to progression to trying to get better control over all of the pieces and all of the parts that allow larger patterns on a grander scale to work the way that they should. And so if you're make an example again, if you're a complete newbie and you're walking into the gym, and the first thing you do, and first thing that most people do, is just lay down right on the flat bench. What does that usually look like? Usually looks like you unrack the bar, you're totally flat to the bench, don't know what you're doing, and then it's total jello arm the whole way, even though it's not too much load for you. Usually most people don't have a problem with the load of the 45-pound bar, but as it's coming down, you have nothing going on because your body doesn't know exactly what's going on here. It's like, okay, what nervous heuristic do I have to work with here to tell me how to reduce the overall noise that's going on in the nervous system and hone it into the signal for the one path of the pattern that needs to happen? That process is always going to be present within you from whatever competence level you are. It's going to start to peel itself back and further back and further back unless you give it a new stimulus that it needs to overcome. And so if you start from something that is so difficult, think, I don't know, doing a clean and jerk or a snatch or something, that's going to be really hard. You're going to have absolutely no idea what's going on. Bad place to start for gaining competence. But what can you do? You can piece that movement apart into its components. Start learning how to do each of them in a disconnected manner. For taking a clean and jerk, what is that? That's an overhead press, right? To a degree, not exactly, but it is a type of overhead press, and it is also a type of deadlift. So the starting point, if you have absolutely no movement competence whatsoever to walk into, that's where you'd start. Pull it apart. You learn the tiny little component parts and then move from there. If that's not your sport, that's not our sport. That's just a good example for me to use to make this make sense as it goes further down the line. For us in bodybuilding, things like the big three: squats, deadlift, bench. Usually bench isn't really one of them because we don't usually do that quite often in bodybuilding. We usually do an incline of some type and never really touch a flat bench. But all those being involved, you have a free squat of some kind, a free hinge of some kind or all kinds, and then pressing. Free weight with dumbbell or barbell in whatever plane that you're going to do it in. Okay, those are our big three categories. If you don't know what you're doing, you get yourself onto any of those movements and it's too high of a scale for you for a skill component, you're going to fail every single time. That's not the place to start. You have to look at it as an index. And so if that's too far away, you've already scrolled way past the search result you were looking for. Okay, way too far. Now you're going to have to backtrack one by one to try and figure out where you're at, or just try and find the information you were looking for, find what you were trying to get at in that one place you already know you can't find it. Your nervous system isn't going to have the ability to figure that out unless it has component parts to start to piece together, or an extremely competent second eye and a learning capability within yourself that is very easily compatible with that teaching method for you to start to assimilate and narrow down that signal versus noise ratio for you to be able to do it better. Okay, so to gain competence, it's always going to come down to the base skill of moving the human body. Understanding that there's the pieced apart singular movements of isolation over every body part that we use as show muscles, quote unquote. But then that's not really how our body works. There's a skill to being able to isolate and set position for singular muscle group movements to try and get them to do their job with the least involvement of other things. But there is a much larger skill of being able to organize larger patterns and manipulate your body relative to those larger patterns and relative to those forces and implements that are moving you through space in a way that aligns for those muscles to do their job as efficiently as possible. That is another skill. And for you to gain either one of them, biggest thing you need is exposure. Accurate exposure to the thing that you're missing at a level of competence just beyond your ability. That is how you get it. If you go way beyond it, you have no chance. But it's just like teaching a child how to speak, which you're gonna
what
have
I'm doing all the time. Yeah, daily.
Yeah. What do? You don't start talking to your kid like we're talking here.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely not. It would just be like right over their head. It wouldn't be helpful. It'd be very difficult for them to learn anything that way. But what do you do when you speak to them? Instinctually, you probably talk to them as if you're trying to edge them along with saying a little bit more than what you already know that they know, so that they can start to grasp by context that next step, so that they can understand what's going on, even though they don't quite yet. Yeah, it's just that one edge in the right direction. And that's how we do it with movement too. If we always set ourselves and these less movement competent individuals within a frame of reference that they can own already, making it as simple as possible. You can do a leg extension, but you can't squat. Okay. But you can't also do the hack squat. You can't pendulum squat. You can't do any other assisted type squat up to that point, but you could leg press. You could do a seated hack squat. You could do that stuff, can't you? It's like, yeah, maybe that's the next step rather than trying to drop them into a squatting pattern just yet. And that's how you build competence. And this is kind of a larger, because my area is within movement most of the time. So this may have gone a different direction than you were expecting it to go.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. A little bit. Yeah.
Yep. So where I come from in this, and the way that I conceptualize this, is that when we're looking at bodybuilding and trying to be competent, and in the degree that we can make just normal programming for a person to get towards the actual goal that we have, building tissue. Building tissue we can do with a myriad of different tools. And those tools don't necessarily always have to be the ideal tool for the job at the time. But they can still do it because hypertrophy is a fairly general adaptation. And so as long as the rest of the internal environment is conducive to it, you're likely going to get some sort of response, whether or not it's 100% optimal response, and get the adaptation of hypertrophy at the degree that we would want it to, you will still get it. And so for you to reach that point that you have access to all the tools in the toolbox with all of the competence needed for all of that to be available to you, and for all of the other modeling of progression that I talked about first in the first question, all of those other levers that you can pull are now available to you as well. Because up until you can move your body the way the human body is supposed to move in an efficient manner across all planes, of which those planes are going to be the places that you start to train these muscles individually or in a compound manner. Then once you have that in place, all of the other stuff that we know about programming and progression means something. Until that point, none of it does. You can only do what you can do as skill practice up to that point. That's for a very remedial individual, because most people don't land at they can do literally nothing. Most people land at the point somewhere, the beginning middle area of competence, of I can do most of this stuff that makes it resemble what it's supposed to be, but I can't really isolate muscles very well, maybe a few of them. Other ones I struggle heavily with. And then most compound movements I can make resemble what they're supposed to be, but there are excessive movement faults that make them an inoptimal pattern to be used for the goal of hypertrophy because of the systemic impact and then the actual individual structure impact that it has by pain, discomfort, tightness that lingers, issues otherwise affecting other things within the same workout or within the same week. Most people land there. And so talking from there, rather than talking about the person that has absolutely no movement skill whatsoever, almost like talking about like a baby trying to learn how to walk, somebody that has middle range, beginning, intermediate ability to do most things that we need to do, all of your work for the most part is going to be skills practice in some way, shape, or form. But that skill is going to be your progressive measure. That is your tempo control. being able to get into end ranges and effectively load them, accuracy of target. Loading will then increase. Loading in directionality to the place that it's supposed to be, so direction within accuracy, is going to increase. And by that token, volume that will not change within that time, because meaningful changes in volume at that point is not going to be helpful. You don't have the skill involved enough for each one of those additions of volume to actually be an equal impact to each other scale and volume. So there's nothing that defines all of them equally. If you don't have any of those in place, volume means nothing. Volume manipulation then meaning nothing. What do you do with that for programming? What do you do with all the rest of them with programming? You don't. All of these are organic things that you end up gaining through gaining movement competence that allow for the last one to happen. And having all of them in place is what allows you to bring together a full program over a week, a month, a year that's going to do what the job is supposed to do.
That's what I think that's the stuff that most people are sometimes not willing to work on, or to find their competence level, or they're probably scared is the wrong word, but they don't want to see where they really are when it comes to the to the basics, your stuff, the competence level we're at, and progress from there, and get the competence level to the next one, as you mentioned, to grasp in context where you could be when we are doing new stuff. So that's, I think most of the time I think about that, it's the enemy is social media. Most of the time I think, because you're scrolling to Instagram, and I'm a part of the problem. I'm doing rels and stuff, giving advice, trying to make people more competent and stuff. But I have no clue who was looking at that stuff, and which their competence level, what's their movement skills. It's can completely go wrong for them. But that's the stuff. That's what I wanted to most hear about. What's your thought process when it comes to that stuff? And that's what I thought. I'm pretty sure that's what I expected you to answer.
Gotcha.
So when it comes to the competence level and stuff, one thing that always comes to my mind, and which was for me stuff that I haven't thought about too much, like it's like the last 2 years, or was the time that I was more into that. It's like stability and output, like what brings stability, what is output, and how did that work together, and that stuff. I was on a seminar with Luke and Dr. John Shallow the last weekend, and that's also a lot of stuff they talked about. If we can dive a little bit into what your perspective on that, because I think that's one of when you got a competence level that is like, it's okay, you're like not advanced athlete, but it's pretty okay. That's where a lot of stuff is missing for a lot of people, included myself. Like, still.
So sure, I can dive into that a little bit. And actually that most of that conversation, what competence I'm referring to, competence almost is a loose translation to stability in this case. Some aspects of it, at least. It's because the competence level that you have that you can actually express within your movements, movement specific competency really is your stability within the movement. That is what that is. And on a grander level, your competence within what you're doing as a whole, rather than movement specific, is going to be referring to your ability to apply yourself through all of the other aspects that allow you progression, which come from the initial stem of being able to move properly. Moving properly is determined by your stability within the movement pattern. And there you go. It's part of the tree. And so stability versus output is a big question. Stability within any movement is going to come from exactly what I was initially talking about. How do you move your body properly? That's really the biggest, easiest way that you can boil it down to one thing. Just like, what do you do to get result? Progressive overload. What do you get to move properly? Stability. Stability is the key that opens the door to all the other movements working properly. If you are unstable within any one of the key hubs, the key areas that have consequence to other places within the body, you're going to have issues with being able to coordinate larger patterns or being able to isolate any sort of a pattern, because any force that you're trying to produce, any force that you're reacting against is going to be traveling through a chain of structures up to its base, or where your connection is to the environment in a way that grounds you against it. In that, there are going to be all of the structures that you pass through with that force and what has to resist your total collapse against the imposing force that is. Your ability to resist that imposing force in the direction that it moves you is your stability. Your ability to fight against that force from making a change to you without your resistance to it, and then your ability to create a counter force to it that is equal to or greater than that force in the same direction or another direction. Otherwise, that is your stability. It's resistance to an ability to generate force within or against another force that is being imposed on you, whether or not that's the force of gravity or momentum and inertia, or directly with loading in the directionality of the loading that is being placed upon you. So stability in itself is the bedrock for what output needs to be. Your output will be forever hampered up until the point that your stability is adequate enough that you're not going to be negatively impacted by the increases in load to the point that your stability deteriorates beyond what is reasonable for you to be able to move and resist that load that you're moving now. And so forever there will be a loading cap on what you can do if your stability is compromised. That is the one major point that puts a cap on your ability to create output. Output overall is just what you can produce within the parameters of loading, volume, and accuracy and control. That'd be it. Mm-hmm. That is going to be your output model. Those are going to be what is there's a larger output model, but within that is the within instantaneous output model of what matters within one set. Within that one set, those are the things that matter. Do you have access to any of those without stability? You do not. And so for you to gain increased output across any sort of a pattern, the base that you need to create is exactly what you have to do to resist those forces in those specific joints that have consequence to the others surrounding. So an example would be, if you want to be creating large output on a lower body pattern, like a squat, what are the joints that actually create consequence to other joints in the surrounding areas? What would you think?
Moin Moin, Arne hier, ganz kurze Unterbrechung, um dich auf die Nettohypertrophie hinzuweisen. Du strebst nach maximaler Hypertrophie, du fragst dich, ob das Steigern des Gewichts auf der Hantel oder doch eher die Mind-Muscle-Connection Priorität hat, ob die Intensität, also die Nähe zum Muskelversagen ausschlaggebend sind oder doch eher ein dynamisches Trainingsvolumen. Kurz gesagt, alle diese Faktoren sind relevant, wenn es um Hypertrophie geht. Die Nettohypertrophie bietet eine Trainingsplanung, die all diesen Faktoren gerecht wird und in einem Zeitraum von 4 Monaten über 3 Phasen, also 3 Mesozyklen, jedem der genannten Faktoren zur passenden Zeit seine stärkste Rolle spielen lässt. Die einzelnen Phasen sind so gestaltet, dass die Ergebnisse in Form von Anpassungen die nächste Phase befeuern. Diese Phasenpotenzierung ermöglicht es auch, Adaptionswiderstände, also Prozesse, die positive Anpassungen mit der Zeit kleiner ausfallen lassen, zu kontern und über alle 3 Phasen möglichst viel Nettohypertrophie zu produzieren. Wenn du also ein Trainingssystem suchst zu einem fairen Preis, dann schau jetzt in die Beschreibung und ich freue mich, dich bei der Nettohypertrophie begrüßen zu dürfen.
It must be your foot and your ankle. from ground up, that's where stability starts.
There you go. Foot in the hip. So foot ankle complex, hip pelvis complex. Those are the two places within a lower body pattern like a squat where your stability lives primarily. If those are the two gatekeepers, where the ankle and the foot is going to be the initial gatekeeper that decides how is this force being distributed as the load is on your back, but really the load is being expressed through you through the floor. Okay. So where is the load being distributed is determined by what configuration you have within the muscular contractions of the lower leg into the ankle and foot that changes the conformational shape of what the foot actually is structured like in that moment. Okay, that decides where that force is going to be aligning to and what you can resist, what degrees of rotation, flexion, extension, and all the other deviations available to the joints within the actual foot itself, within the ankle, within the lower leg, and then into the upper leg into the hip into the pelvis into the SI joint into the spine, then the spine up into the rib cage to scaps to shoulders. Everything from that base all the way up, they all have a connection because the force is traveling through all of them. Okay, if they're traveling through all of them, in each one of those joints has muscles that surround them in all directions, right? They're surrounded in all directions. What are all those muscles for? Question.
Yeah, what did the muscle do? When the line is not in line, they are compensating, probably.
Somewhat. That it's not exactly the word I would say, but that would be the idea. Is that what those other muscles are doing is what the general idea of what stability is in a representational form in an isolated fashion like this. What those other muscles are doing is they are determining, directing those forces and the directions that those structures, the bony structures, can move in. And they are stopping you, resisting motion in directions that it's not supported to move in. That is what they're all doing. And so you have your prime movers that do the work of moving something through space, moving your body through space against a load. We have those present doing their job and creating stability in their own ways. But we have all the muscles that don't directly line up into the line of force that creates the prime moving need out of those tissues that are doing their job to help guide the path for all of those bony structures and joints to then pass through. That is what they're there for. That is your stability. It's your ability to determine where these forces that are acting upon you are getting directed to, and then how your body responds and how your conformational shape responds to it, how you're able to access ranges of motion within the management of those loads, how you interact with the environment as a result of that, and what the success of the movement will be throughout the longest range of motion that's available to you based off of all the prior constraints. That's your stability. If your stability is up to par, then you have access to output. But if you don't have those other parts of the system, the things that determine and decide how the structure is going to align itself so that structure allows for function to happen, function allows for action to happen, and then action is what creates your output. Okay, so dissect that one, the flow chart. Structure is the bones, right? Bones, joints. Structure is going to be moved based off of function. That's the next step. The function of other tissues to align those structures is what opens the gate for you to be able to do action of those prime moving muscles that are aligned to that force to do the job of moving through space. Not controlling where the load is directed through space, moving it through space, and moving your body through space as a reaction to it. Without structure being moved by function, function won't allow for action to happen at its greatest potential. Without action happening at its greatest potential, there's no output present. And there's your model.
That's awesome. That's awesome, man. That's also a deep dive into that stuff. But I guess a lot of people now got those sequence right you just mentioned, and that they get the sequence right. So they all people hear about those stuff, but they don't get the sequence right. That like myself also, like years ago, I thought about that stuff, but I couldn't connect the dots. And how does that work? So for me, it's kind of something like, to boil it down, like something like a joint sense, and something like a like a neurologic efficiency. So what can your brain, your neurological system can give you feedback from all from the floor down up there, and how can you coordinate everything to make it move and to function the best, get the best output out. That's what we are all about. That's what we want to do, to get get tension on the tissue, to make adaptations. That's awesome. Yeah, just learned a lot of stuff. But for me, it's like in English, I'm like, okay, you asked me a question, and I
do forget that
English and stuff. Yeah, but yeah, challenge me. That's the stuff I like to do. That's why I do the podcast, do it in English. When it would be easy, I just got a German guest and talk about the easy stuff. That's what we are here. That's why we're doing the sport, to make get new input in. Yeah. Cool. We probably can talk about 3 hours about stability and output and stuff. To make this podcast a little bit more not just about the physical stuff, but also more a little bit about the mental stuff, which is also a big part for me, also for everybody. Another point I wanted to talk about is readiness. A lot of people nowadays talk about my readiness when it comes to training, and I think you can talk about readiness in physical regards. So how much energy you got in the system or in different systems, and you got a mental readiness for me. And for me, it's like would be interesting to hear about your thoughts about how those readiness tanks, if you got two tanks, how they interact with each other, how can they interfere each other, probably, when you use stuff to get to hype the readiness that is not there, to artificially light it up, something like that. What's your stance when it comes to readiness, and for also mostly the mental readiness?
So I would propose a different way of thinking about it with an analogy. So rather than thinking of it as like two tanks that at some point they both overflow, or one overflows that has effect to the other one, I would look at it a little bit differently, to say that your readiness just sits on a curve, which is pretty basic. It's the arousal curve, which is actually a pretty well-studied physiological thing. And so if we were just to stick it to that, the arousal curve, everyone has a different arousal curve for what they optimally perform within, which is what we would know. And so what we would know is that everybody kind of has their sweet spot, their range for what they like to be for their stimulation before they do any task. The nature of the task is going to change where they fall on that arousal curve and what's going to work best for them. And so that part is a little bit lesser discussed as well, is that what specific tasks, what specific tasks or specific things within training do you find that you need to be very highly stimulated for you to be able to perform well on? And what do you need to be very low on the stimulation curve to perform well on? So it's not just this, it's not your stamina bar on a video game for, your magic points or whatever. You don't just keep on adding to it and go like, it's better and better and better and better and better, which is where you're kind of getting at with like using stimulants and things like that, and like getting overhyped, like taking 400 milligrams of caffeine taking some ephedrine and, I don't know, taking a check drop or something like that so your eyes start bleeding. And then here we go, it's time to squat. Like, that may, for some, for somebody, that might be absolutely perfect. But for a lot of people, that's not going to be what it is, because everybody has an individual place that they like to sit. And part of that also comes back to the skill component and competency component, and the environment that you learn the certain skill in, and how comfortable you are with that skill, how comfortable you are with the environment that you do that skill in. And all of those other things play into where on the arousal curve you in that environment necessarily have to sit to perform your best. And so for any person that's trying to get prepared into a physical task, the physical and the mental are not separated phenomena. Physical readiness and preparedness is going to be your management throughout the other 24 hours of the day. You getting your food in, you getting your sleep, getting your hydration, you being prepared well enough in advance of the session so that you don't have any of those other things coming up too close to it, having to have too much food in your system at the time, overly watered, underly watered, too much sleep too close, too little sleep, any of those things. Like anything that is going to be a perturbance to your actual normal routine that is set in place over longer periods of time, which is something you should have, that is going to create an aberrance in the way that you're feeling at that time, is going to change your physical readiness. Those things matter. Those things matter just as well as your digestion at the time, your mental clarity, and your emotional state, your general stress levels, whether that's psychological, physiological, or any other possible source in your life that could be adding to your stress levels, how well you manage them, what time you spend on managing it, and where it's placed within the proximity to your training, your general physical activity throughout the day, whether it's too much, too little. Is too much is going to drain your energy. Too little, you're probably going to walk in there feeling lazy and too tight, and things are not going to feel good with your patterning because you haven't moved yourself much. So like all these little things are physical preparedness. Mental preparedness has a little bit of crossover with the mental clarity and the stress and all this other stuff. But your mental clarity is also going to be, it's going to be impacted directly by all the things that made you physically prepared or not. Partially because most of us are going to be so perfectionist most of the time that when you're trying to be prepared mentally, you're going to be thinking about, oh, wait, I didn't do all of those things properly that I should have for me to be properly prepared and ready for this. And so I'm kind of worried about that now. And there goes your mental readiness. But you could have had one. You could have had the mental preparedness and missed the physical, but now you have neither. And so there's that problem that's there because we're all neurotic like that. But then the rest of it is going to be with your management of stressors, and that management or utilization of stressors within that period of time that you have for training to gear it into your performances. Because stress isn't, I'm not using it as a bad word or a stress as a word that just implicates all of bad things within your life that you're trying to ignore for the time being. Stress or stimulation or arousal or all these things is just how heightened are you in a mental state? How edged are you? What is going on in there? How much is going on in there? How much drive is there behind it? And so we have things that can help us with that. We have training partners that can help with that. They can bring us down. They can bring us up. There's supplements that you can take that can either bring you up or bring you down too. There's stimulants that you can take. There are definitely some nootropics that you can take that can bring you down a little bit and take you away from being overstimulated and get you focused more so. Bring you away from being overly jittery and bringing you down to a place that you're a little bit more calm, collected, and smooth riding. There's music that you can use that is going to do one of many things to your emotional state, which is going to change your physical readiness because of the fact that you're affected by that music and what that emotionally does to you, what memories that brings to you, or just in itself, what your thoughts are doing, what your mental cueing will do, what your physical introspection is going to give you as a stimulation for what you're going to be feeling like. Because you can get yourself hyped up without really thinking or saying a word to yourself or having most of any of these other things in place. If you know how to click the physical trigger by feeling the sensation in your body of you being more active, more ready, that is in itself a way that you can actually turn up your readiness. Breathing patterns, specific breathing patterns can turn up your physical arousal as well, which will turn up your mental arousal, as that feedback loop is a positive feedback loop that turns into itself. So we have a ton of tools at our disposal, and we're going to instinctively use quite a few of them without thinking too much about like actually using them. There's some that you're going to end up having to learn at some point how to control better as you get further and further down your actual competence spectrum to get better and better at doing the thing that you're doing. And at some point, there will be a breaking point where you have to figure out what's the next step forward on this forking path of my performances and progressions. How do I step onto that next forking path to get further forward so I don't just spin around and sit in this same little cul-de-sac forever? You make that next step by having to figure out, okay, what's missing? Maybe you're not prepared physically because you're not really managing everything outside of the gym. Maybe that's not it. Cross that off the list. That's done. Mental readiness. Are you stepping under a squat bar or getting into the leg press or getting into your bicep curl set, thinking about the most aggressive thoughts that you could possibly have? Is that conducive for your performance? Maybe it's not. Do you find that all the other key components to progression, see, I tie it all back. The key points to your progression, are all of those still in place? Is your load management there? Is your accuracy there? Is your ability to load effectively into end ranges there? Is your volume actually effective within the ranges that you have all the other parameters set? Is the loading accurate to what you can actually handle? And how that affects everything else in the feedback loop anyway. Is all that in place, or is that completely thrown out? If you're overstimulated, is that screwing you up in that direction? If you're understimulated, are you just completely lackadaisical and you don't really care and you're just kind of going through the motions and it's like, yeah, whatever? Is that where you need to be either? Probably not. But somewhere in between those places where you're going to rip somebody's head off or you're going to fall asleep is the happy medium, and almost everybody falls somewhere in here. And where it is that you find yourself is going to be pretty much individual to the person at that time and that circumstance for whatever their outside circumstances are in their life, and then what their actual psychological makeup is and what they connect with. I could use myself as an example. For me to squat, which is my favorite example, because it's my favorite movement. But for me to squat, there's a fine balance point that I need to sit at for me to be able to do that movement. Because I'm thinking intensely about the skill. Okay, I'm trying to go through all the pieces, having a second to have full introspection. Like, okay, where is everything? Feeling all of the pieces and parts in space. Does all this feel recognizable? Is this where it's supposed to be? Is this just like it's been done 1,000 times before? Is it not? Having that moment. You can't do that when you're like in rage. But you also can't squat. I mean, I don't need to pat myself on the back, but here we go. You're not going to squat 6, 7, 8 plates if you are completely lax about it. You're not going to do it. It won't happen. You will get crushed before you really even start to know what happened. That's just the fact of the matter. And so there's that really fine line of I am calm enough that I can breathe normally, that I can control that part of the arousal of that tool that I have to play with. I can control my breathing completely here. But everything from my nose up here, my eyes and everything, that's in another world here. That's in another place. And I'm trying to use all the aggression and intensity that is in place from here to impose that into my physical body. But that's not to go into blind rage. I'm not going red eye and just sending it. That doesn't work either. And so for me, that fine line is very, very delicate. Going too far fails immediately. First rep might happen, but it'll get messed up completely. And then there's no saving it. Go under, I might get a couple reps in, which would probably perform me better than going way too over on the arousal curve. But it's still, I'm going to miss the rep target because I'm not going to feel as intensely about getting the next reps. The drive isn't going to be there. The questioning is going to be there because my mind isn't as aroused to the point that I'm focused on the singular task. The higher your arousal is, the more singularly focused you end up being. Mm-hmm. When I'm sitting there and I have too low on the arousal curve, I'm thinking about 6 other things going on in my head. And in some cases, that's exactly what brings you down the arousal curve. So it's reverse causation at times as well. So that you can try and set yourself within one place, but it's not like you're a robot and you can just like set your dial. Be like, I'm going to here and we're good. This is the arousal place that I'm going to be. It's all of the things that are having the interaction with you and your behaviors, mental and physical behaviors that create your arousal state. And so if you're trying to stick within a higher arousal state so you can perform, but then you're thinking about all the things that are going on within your pattern and how you're going to be successful at it, you're not going to be successful at it, this hurts or that doesn't hurt, or why does this feel like it's turned this special direction, or am I going to be able to do this? Am I recovered enough? Did I drink enough water earlier today? Am I going to tear a quad? Am I going to like this, that, the other? And it goes down the rabbit hole. Like that will pull your arousal down, because then there creeps in the self-doubt. There creeps in all of the other thinking that even just thinking and entertaining more things in itself will be enough to bring you down. And so all those things are present in most of those activities, especially when they call upon you a lot. And the impact of being too high or too low is going to be different based off of what the task is. On something that's pretty high risk, high reward, like that, that's high stakes. Doing the same thing on a bicep curl, well, what are you gonna lose on a bicep curl, really? I mean, worst case scenario, you tear a bicep, but even then, the likelihood of you tearing a bicep is kind of low. Like, it's a bicep curl, like really? Probably not, unless you're trying to do some Larry Wheels type stuff, and then there you go. But unless you're that stupid, you're not going to have that happen. So, but the risk there, instead of you being a crumpled mess of a human being under a barbell, you have the possibility of you never really fully connecting with the movement that you're doing, and then never reaping the benefit of having put in all the time that you did put in on it over years. Which, if you really care about the goal of bodybuilding, that is going to be just as impactful, or it should be just as an impactful proposition to you as ending up a human heap under a bar from failing on a squat. That should be of near equal dire consequence to you. If you're putting in hours upon hours upon hours training, doing all this stuff and spending your whole life living this lifestyle, but then you're absent because you're not accurately applying yourself mentally, which roughly approximates itself to your arousal, because your accuracy within your arousal determines your focus. And that focus determines how well you can actually accurately output on the movement, given all the other things and prerequisites are in place. You miss out on the whole result of what you were trying to do, and all that work is for naught. And so that's really the way that I look at the whole paradigm for what your place between physical preparedness and mental preparedness and arousal works. They both have, you were right to say with the analogy that they do interact with each other. Absolutely, they do. Their interaction is so much more intertwined than even just trying to speak of it in that analogy makes it plain to see. Even that, it's almost like it's two separate topics and two separate tanks that you're dealing with. It's like, no, these are completely, they are one thing. They are one thing that we have decided to conceptualize in two different ways so that we can understand it better. But really, when you look at it, if you have one thing that's in a different place than another one than it should be for your optimal balance, you're going to be somewhere else. And then everything has a cross effect to one another and multiple effects across the tree. And so
when we're talking, when you set up like time and circumstances, what came into my mind directly was contest prep. When you are contest prepping, you directly feel that both are tied together, that they both interact with each other, but it's a complete different circumstance and complete different time when it comes to the mental part and how much arousal, when do you profit from it? Like in your off season, for me, like in contest prep, the last like 8 weeks, I'm much more dependent on on the arousal I use for getting my training in, get a stimulus in, than being physically ready. I'm not physically ready anymore, definitely not. But I'm compensating through arousal. And it could be, like you said, it could be down, it could be up, it could be both. It's something like the example, like you're going into a session and you are putting on your headphones in and you're like, oh, put that out, throw that throw them away. And I can't even, one sound is too much. I have to think about the dumbbell RDLs that I do in like 15 minutes. So that's all I can think about. That's my capacity, and the arousal, like being there, and there's light and there's other people talking. Yeah, that's enough. Not music, not anything. That was for me the stuff. Then when I thought about that in another way than just getting some pre-workout in, getting your favorite music and the emotional stuff that can help. But when your capacity is like the lowest you can get, where standing. That was for me always something. When I first thought about that. So a lot of people here doing bodybuilding, not doing contest prep, not want to compete, completely fine. But that's when you're just a diet. Could be the same experience when you're dieting down, and you're thinking, why can't I hear music today? What's wrong with me? It's nothing wrong. It's a feedback from your body and your nervous system. So that's a big part. Great to talk about that. So I got so much more I wanted to touch on with you. So probably we should get you on for a second time in the near future. Nick, awesome insights. That's the stuff my audience like to hear and talk about, the nitty-gritty stuff, but keeping the full perspective and apply that stuff into your progression into sport. So you said about your competition plans. So what's the plans? What do you got exact plans, or do you said November something?
Yep. Yeah. November is the plan. Yep. So that's pretty much all I'm going to say about it. November is the plan.
Okay. And now everybody can think what that could mean.
Well, it's going to be a somewhat smaller show down here in Florida to start with. Mm-hmm. And then after that, if all goes well, then hopefully I will have a national qualification. And if I show up properly and I look like I have the potential to do something, I will go and make a nationals run and then see where I land there, and then get my feet wet and see how much time it's going to take, how much work it'll be, and where I'm deficient, so that I can make the run at the pro card in X amount of years from now. So that is where I'm at.
Pretty exciting when people scale back and we can hear what's your age now and what's your complete look on the sport, what people heard about the last
hour and more, they can think, and that's a lot of things I'd like to see. It's just the start, probably for hopefully a long bodybuilding career. And
I sure hope so. It spells bad things for me if it's not.
We will never know what happens in life, but that's the plan, huh? So Nick, thank you very much. Where can people find you? Do you got any new stuff you can plug in here? I thought of something like a website or something. I thought.
Yep.
Let us know.
Yep. So you can find me, and if you were looking to work with me personally in any capacity, so that's consultations as a coach, as just working on execution on specific movements and things. So that's somewhat like a consultation. You can find me at teamgloff.com. Go find everything that's available for me there. And then as of right now, the biggest hub for my most visible information is on Instagram with my name, which is just Nick Gloff. And then on YouTube as well, I have videos that are coming out as frequently as I can get them to be filmed. And so that is also under my name, Nick Gloff. So all very simple, very easy to find on the internet. So if you have any interest in going and hearing me ramble about other things and make very large topics into smaller topics, and those smaller topics into larger ones again in different directions, go find me there and you'll see a whole lot of it.
Nice. So every listener, you can find it in the show notes, or if you're watching it on YouTube, in the show notes. I will link everything that you mentioned so people can find you there. So Nick, once again, thank you for your time, for the input. A lot of inspiration, learned a lot, also just in 1 hour. And probably get you on a second time for the other topics I wrote down in the near future. To all the heroes listeners, thank you for your time, and hear you in the next episode. Bye-bye.